Our learning goal for today is I can add fractions with unlike denominators. Be sure to write your learning goal on your note-taking page. Let's take a look at our first problem. Malia bought shell beads and glass beads to weave into designs in her baskets. She bought 1/4 pound of shell beads and 3/8 pound of glass beads. How many pounds of beads did she buy? I have to ask myself if it's going to be addition or subtraction. So if the question asked how many pounds of beads she bought, and I know that she bought 2 types of beads, I'll have to add both fractions. The problem is that the denominators are different. One has a 4 in the denominator, and the other fraction has an 8. I've got to find a way to make both fractions the same denominator, because if the denominator is not the same, the whole is not the same. I need to find a multiple that both of the fraction denominators have in common. So if I think of the multiples of 4, I could list 4, 8, 12, and the multiples of 8 would be 8, 16. I can stop there because I can find a common multiple. The least common multiple that both fractions have would be 8. So I need to change both fractions to have a denominator of 8. Well, 3/8 will be pretty easy because there's already an 8 in the denominator. So I can just bring down that fraction. But in order to find the denominator, to change the denominator for 1/4, I have to find an equivalent fraction. So I have to think of it like, how many times does 4 go into 8? So what I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So now my new fraction is 2/8. So 1/4 is really the same as 2/8. Now that both fractions are the same denominator, I can add them together. So 2/8 plus 3/8 equals 5/8. So Malia bought 5/8 of a pound of beads. Let's take a look at another problem. Maya makes trail mix by combining 1/3 cup of mixed nuts and 1/4 cup of dried fruit. What is the total amount of ingredients in her trail mix? The first thing I notice is that the word combining would tell us that this would be an addition problem. So she makes 1/3 cup of mixed nuts and 1/4 cup of dried fruit. So we're going to add these 2 fractions together. The problem is that both of the denominators are different. I have to have the same denominator. I need to find something that they have in common. It's easiest if I find the least common multiple. So I want to list the multiples of 3 and the multiples of 4 and find the lowest number that they have in common. So let's list the multiples of 3. 3, 6, 9, 12. Let me start listing the multiples of 4 and see if I can find a match. 4, 8, 12. So 12 is the first number they have in common. So that's the number I want to use. So now I have to make equivalent fractions. So I'm going to put 12 on the denominator for both of the fractions. Now remember, I'm looking for an equivalent fraction. So what I do on the bottom, I must do on the top as well. So 3 to 12, how do I get from 3 to 12? Well, I have to multiply by 4. So what I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So 1 times 4 would be 4. And then if I look at 1/4, how do I get from 4 to 12? I would multiply by 3. So what I do on the bottom, I must do on the top. So 1 times 3 is 3. So now I have 4/12 plus 3/12. They're really the same fraction as I had before. They're just equivalent fractions. So now I'm going to add 4 plus 3 is 7, and 12, my denominator, will stay the same. So 1/3 plus 1/4 would equal 7/12. Let's try one more problem for practice. Hillary is making a tote bag for her friend. She uses 1/2 yard of blue fabric and 1/2 yard of red fabric. How much fabric does Hillary use? Well, we have 2 amounts of fabric, and it asked how much she uses. It's almost like asking how much she uses altogether. So I know I'll have to add. So we have 1/2 plus 1/4. Once again, the denominators are different. So I need to find a common denominator for both fractions in order for me to add. So let's list the multiples of 2 in order to find a common denominator. So 2, 4, I know I can stop at 4 because the next one, if I list the multiples of 4, it's going to start with 4. So look, I already found my least common multiple. So I'm going to leave the 4 as my denominator, and if I look at 1/4, to get from 4 to 4, I just times 1, and anything times 1 is going to be the same thing. That's why I can leave the fraction 1/4 exactly as it is. So let's look at the 1/2 on the top. I need to find an equivalent fraction. So in order to change the fraction from 1/2 to something with a denominator of 4, I need to multiply by 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. What I do on the bottom, I have to do on the top. So now the top number will be 2. So 2/4 plus 1/4. Now I can add them together. 2 plus 1 is 3, and my denominator stays the same. So my answer would be 1/2 plus 1/4 equals 3/4. I want you to try 2 practice problems on your own. The first one is 4/6 plus 1/4. If you take a look at the denominators, they're not the same. So first, you must find the least common multiple so that you know what you can change the denominator to. On the second problem, it's the same thing, 2/3 plus 3/9. Find the least common multiple, change them to equivalent fractions, and then add. If you have any questions, make sure to write them down on your note-taking page. I'll see you tomorrow.